In the sweltering Texas summer of 1943, within the barbed wire confines of Crystal City, a curious, almost surreal scene unfolded daily in the mess halls. Imagine the clatter of metal trays, the humid air thick with the smell of unfamiliar cooking, as Japanese prisoners of war, accustomed to the structured elegance of rice and fish, found themselves staring at mountains of crisp, green lettuce. It was a staple of the American diet, yet utterly alien, and to many, an insult. They'd often laugh, a harsh, disbelieving sound echoing off the bare walls, muttering in Japanese, "Not even animals would eat this." Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary cultural clash, tell me, where are you watching this from today? The irony, however, was profound. This despised watery leaf, so casually rejected, represented a nutritional bounty few could have imagined, especially compared to the austere realities of their homeland. The vibrant, almost luminous green of the lettuce on the metal trays stood in stark contrast to the drab uniforms and the grim faces of men far from home. A visual paradox that would slowly, profoundly, reshape their understanding of their captors and their own fate. Among these men was Kenji Tanaka, a former Imperial Army corporal, his small worn wooden carving of a bird hidden in his bunk, his only tangible link to home. His motivation was simple: maintain dignity and survive, even as he wrestled with the shame of capture and the bewildering generosity of his enemy. Overseeing the chaotic logistics of the mess hall was Captain Eleanor Vance, a no-nonsense officer whose grease-stained ledger was her constant companion. Her daily dilemma pitted military protocol and the need for efficient feeding against the baffling cultural resistance to what she considered perfectly good food. She was driven by an unyielding desire to ensure every man, enemy or not, received adequate nutrition. Bridging this chasm was Hiroshi Sato, a Nisei civilian interpreter whose well-thumbed English-Japanese dictionary symbolized his precarious position, navigating mistrust from both sides. How did the War Department, embroiled in global conflict, develop a nutritional plan for enemy combatants that included such an abundance of fresh produce? What unseen bureaucratic directives, perhaps buried in telegrams between Washington, D.C., and camp commanders like those at Camp Swift, Texas, or Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, outlined the specific caloric and dietary requirements for these prisoners, leading to such an unexpected menu? Those unseen bureaucratic directives, often printed on thin, onion-skin paper, were indeed critical. They emerged from a surprising corner of the War Department, the Subsistence Division, driven by a directive from the Provost Marshal General's office. Here, amidst the clatter of typewriters and the faint smell of stale coffee, nutritionists like Dr. Evelyn Reed, a pioneer in wartime dietary science, meticulously calculated the daily caloric intake for every prisoner of war. Her team's reports, stamped "restricted," specified not just calories, typically around 2,500 for non-laboring POWs, increasing to 3,000 for those working, but also precise vitamin and mineral requirements. It was a scientific approach designed to maintain health and prevent epidemics, which could ironically strain American resources. How did this meticulous planning, born in Washington, D.C. labs, translate into the actual food served in a dusty Texas mess hall, particularly when faced with profound cultural barriers? The challenge was immense. At Camp Swift, Texas, Captain Vance found herself wrestling with these directives, her ledger filled with entries for lettuce, tomatoes, and carrots, alongside flour and meat rations. The official policy was clear: POWs were to receive rations comparable to, or slightly less than, American service personnel. But comparable didn't mean identical. The quartermasters, focused on efficiency and bulk procurement, often supplied what was abundant and affordable locally. And in the rich farmlands of Texas, that meant a continuous supply of fresh produce. The cool, crisp texture of a freshly picked head of lettuce, so appealing to an American palate, was simply alien to many Japanese prisoners. It wasn't just a matter of taste, it was a matter of culinary identity, a silent daily confrontation. This clash wasn't confined to the mess hall. Telegrams, some now declassified at the National Archives, reveal a deluge of complaints from camp commanders across the nation. POWs refusing green vegetables, one from Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. Dated November 1943, starkly read. Another from Fort Custer, Michigan, detailed a near mutiny over boiled cabbage. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were a systemic challenge to the War Department's carefully constructed nutritional framework. It was in this environment that figures like Hiroshi Sato, the Nisei interpreter at Crystal City, became indispensable. His well-thumbed English-Japanese dictionary often lay open on his desk, its pages soft with use, as he navigated the delicate balance between military protocol and cultural understanding. He'd explain, patiently, that the salad was not a punishment, but a source of essential nutrients. Yet, the deep-seated mistrust remained. What specific, often absurd, daily clashes emerged from this cultural chasm, and how did the camp administration, under pressure from Washington, begin to adapt? One might wonder about the unofficial channels that emerged, perhaps through the quiet efforts of interpreters or compassionate medical staff, to mitigate these daily culinary clashes, or the sheer volume of complaints that must have filled the camp commander's office regarding the unfit food. Records from the War Department, later made public, would reveal that by late 1944, a staggering 37 unique dietary adjustments had been made across various POW camps, reflecting a struggle to balance cultural expectations with nutritional science. The initial disdain for American vegetables, particularly the humble lettuce, was not merely a matter of taste. It was a symptom of a deeper cultural misunderstanding, one that would be gradually, almost imperceptibly, chipped away by the relentless reality of camp life and the unexpected resilience of the human palate. The initial disdain for American vegetables, particularly the humble lettuce, was not merely a matter of taste. It was a symptom of a deeper cultural misunderstanding, one that would be gradually, almost imperceptibly, chipped away by the relentless reality of camp life and the unexpected resilience of the human palate. This slow erosion began in the mess halls, where the stark white porcelain of the plates contrasted sharply with the vibrant green of the lettuce, a visual challenge to deeply ingrained culinary traditions. It was a daily, quiet battle of wills, fought not with weapons, but with forks and unspoken expectations. Captain Eleanor Vance, her ledger often smudged with kitchen grease, faced this challenge head-on every afternoon. Her directives from the War Department, specifically a circular dated April 1943 from the Provost Marshal General's office, mandated specific caloric intake for POWs, including fresh produce. Yet, compliance was another matter entirely. Vance often found herself watching men like Kenji Tanaka, whose face, usually a mask of stoicism, would subtly crinkle at the sight of the salad, a silent but clear rejection. Tanaka, accustomed to the delicate balance of Japanese cuisine, saw the raw, undressed lettuce as crude, a dish devoid of spirit. What could possibly bridge such a profound cultural chasm, especially when communication itself was a minefield? It was in these moments that Hiroshi Sato, the Nisei interpreter, became indispensable. His role extended far beyond mere translation. He was a cultural bridge builder, often explaining the concept of a salad as a refreshing, nutrient-rich side dish, not a main course or an insult. He'd point to the crisp texture, the subtle bitterness, trying to frame it within a palatable context. Yet, the resistance was fierce. Reports like the one from Camp Swift, Texas in June 1944 frequently cited non-consumption of greens as a primary dietary issue, leading to concerns about scurvy and other deficiencies. The sheer volume of uneaten lettuce left wilting on trays became a silent testament to the impasse. But the War Department wasn't static. By mid-1944, Washington, D.C. began to issue new, more nuanced guidelines. These weren't grand policy shifts, but subtle adjustments, often spurred by the persistent reports of frustrated camp commanders. The scent of boiled cabbage and the sight of untouched lettuce, day after day, eventually permeated the bureaucratic walls. These shifts, detailed in internal memoranda now housed at the National Archives, weren't about abandoning nutritional goals, but about finding a pragmatic middle ground. They asked, for instance, how small, seemingly insignificant changes could alter perceptions. If you appreciate these glimpses into the untold stories of history, consider subscribing to Whispers from WW2. It helps us continue bringing these forgotten narratives to light. One such adjustment, quietly implemented at Crystal City, allowed for the occasional substitution of cooked greens for raw salads, a small concession that began to chip away at the absolute rejection. It wasn't about liking the food, not yet, but about accepting it as sustenance. What other small, almost invisible changes, driven by both necessity and a nascent understanding, would eventually lead these men to reconsider the very food they had once mocked? The answers lay in the subtle interplay of hunger, observation, and the surprising power of the palate to adapt under duress. Hunger, a universal language, began to whisper its own truths in Crystal City, slowly eroding the rigid cultural barriers that had once defined the mess hall. The aroma of simmering collard greens, unfamiliar yet not entirely unappealing, now occasionally drifted through the dining area, a stark contrast to the crisp, raw lettuce that had once dominated. Captain Eleanor Vance, poring over her daily consumption logs in the flickering lamplight of her office, noted a marginal, almost imperceptible uptick in the intake of these cooked vegetables. Kenji Tanaka, observing his fellow prisoners, saw fewer plates pushed away untouched. He himself, driven by a gnawing emptiness, found the softened texture less offensive, the slight bitterness a minor hurdle against the promise of a full stomach. His worn wooden bird, clutched in his bunk at night, felt heavier with each passing day, a symbol of a home that felt increasingly distant and, perhaps, less abundant than the present reality. But it wasn't just hunger. Whispers, carried on the thin air of the camp, began to paint a picture far grimier than the one projected by imperial propaganda. These were not the triumphant narratives of glory, but fragmented reports from Red Cross letters, carefully screened, or hushed conversations with new arrivals from the Pacific Theater. These men, often gaunt and weary, spoke of rationing, of dwindling food supplies, and the harsh realities of a nation at war. Dr. Eleanor Reed, a nutritionist consulting for the War Department on POW diets, compiled internal reports detailing the stark caloric discrepancies between the average Japanese civilian diet and the planned rations for prisoners in the U.S. By late 1943, her memos highlighted a growing concern for malnutrition among Japanese civilians, a stark contrast to the comparatively robust provisions at camps like Crystal City. The very abundance of American produce, the fresh green lettuce they had once scorned, now stood as a silent, almost unsettling testament to a logistical and agricultural power they had perhaps underestimated. How could a nation, so seemingly wasteful with its vegetables, offering what seemed like mere animal fodder, be so effectively sustaining its own population and even its enemies, while their homeland struggled for basic sustenance? This gnawing question, born from stark comparison, began to chip away at deeply held beliefs, forcing a reevaluation of what they thought they knew. Inside the mess hall, The air hung heavy with the smell of boiled cabbage and something else, something green and watery. Kenji Tanaka, usually stoic, found his gaze lingering on the crisp, pale green leaves of iceberg lettuce piled high on the metal trays. He remembered the faint, almost metallic tang of it on his tongue from his first defiant bite. It was a taste utterly divorced from the rich umami of home, yet undeniably fresh. His small, worn wooden carving of a bird, hidden beneath his mattress, felt colder, heavier, a silent anchor to a world that seemed to be slipping further away. He'd overheard hushed conversations, fragments of news from new arrivals, men whose faces were gaunter than his own, their uniforms threadbare. They spoke of cities dimmed by rationing, of meager rice portions, of mothers trying to stretch a single potato for a family. The contrast was a physical ache, a dissonance that vibrated in the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above the tables. How could a nation, supposedly locked in a brutal war, sustain such an apparent extravagance of food, while his own people withered? Captain Eleanor Vance, her ledger open on her office desk, didn't deal in philosophy, only logistics. Her daily battle was against waste and inefficiency. Reports from the War Department, specifically the Quartermaster Corps, outlined stringent caloric and nutrient requirements for all POWs, enemy or not. A telegram from Washington, D.C., dated July 12, 1943, reiterated the directive: maintain health and morale, adhere to Geneva Convention standards. This wasn't charity, it was protocol, a calculated move to prevent retaliatory treatment of American POWs abroad. Yet, she saw the uneaten lettuce wilting slightly on the discarded plates, a stark visual of the cultural chasm. She'd even tried having cooks shred it, mix it, anything to make it more palatable. But the resistance was deep-seated. Her dilemma wasn't just about feeding men, but about feeding men who actively rejected what was offered. Hiroshi Sato, the Nisei interpreter, felt the tension like a physical weight. His well-thumbed English-Japanese dictionary was a constant companion, its pages often damp with the Texas humidity. He translated complaints daily, the same refrains: too watery, no flavor, animal food. But he also heard the other whispers, the ones that spoke of the desperation in Japan, the growing hunger. He saw the subtle changes in the prisoners' faces, the slow filling out of gaunt cheeks, the faint glint of health returning to their eyes. It wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He once translated a Red Cross letter for a new arrival, a man who spoke of his sister in Tokyo surviving on boiled weeds. The man's eyes, usually hard, softened, a fleeting moment of profound sorrow and confusion. What did it mean? This enemy who fed you better than your own family could. These were the untold stories, the quiet battles fought not with bullets, but with plates of food and deeply ingrained beliefs. If you find these hidden layers of history compelling, the kind of nuanced investigation that reshapes understanding, consider subscribing to Whispers from WW2. We delve into these forgotten moments, revealing the complex human experiences behind the headlines, ensuring these crucial perspectives are never lost. But beyond the logistical marvel, what truly began to shift these men's perceptions? Was it merely the filling of their stomachs, or something more profound? A subtle erosion of the propaganda they had carried with them across the Pacific. The answer, subtle as it was profound, began not with a grand declaration, but with the slow, relentless rhythm of daily life inside Crystal City. Imagine the Texas sun beating down, baking the corrugated iron of the mess halls, the air thick with the smell of cooked beef, and a faint, unfamiliar green scent. For men like Kenji Tanaka, the initial rejection of American lettuce, the almost visceral disgust, was a shield. It was a defiant, silent declaration against a captor whose food seemed designed to mock their culinary heritage, a heritage steeped in delicate flavors and precise presentation. They had laughed, a hollow sound echoing off the bare walls, repeating the phrase, "Not even animals would eat this." Yet, hunger is a persistent teacher, and the reality of the camp was inescapable. Captain Eleanor Vance, her uniform often damp with perspiration, meticulously noted the plate waste in her ledger, a baffling defiance of perfectly good nutrition. Her reports, filed to higher commands, detailed the cultural resistance to staples like iceberg lettuce, a stark contrast to the War Department's directives on caloric intake. She saw the stacks of untouched greens, vibrant and crisp from nearby Texas farms, and wondered how to bridge this chasm of understanding. What she didn't fully grasp was the sheer scale of the logistical achievement behind those fresh vegetables, a network of farms and transport lines that even in wartime could deliver such abundance. Hiroshi Sato, the Nisei interpreter, often found himself caught in the middle, translating complaints about the watery leaves one moment and then explaining American nutritional standards the next. He recalled one sweltering afternoon in July 1943, a young prisoner, thin and visibly unwell, refused his portion of lettuce. Sato, speaking softly, explained that this very leaf was packed with vitamins, a concept largely unknown in the Japanese military diet. He watched as the man, hesitant, picked up a single cool leaf, its edges slightly crinkled, and slowly, reluctantly, put it to his mouth. It was a tiny victory, a hairline crack in the wall of resistance. The propaganda they carried, the ingrained belief in American weakness and decadence, began to fray at the edges, not through direct confrontation, but through comparison. Letters from home, carefully screened by censors, and hushed conversations with new arrivals from the Pacific Front painted an increasingly grim picture of Japan. Food shortages became severe, rationing tightened, and the availability of fresh produce, once taken for granted, dwindled to almost nothing. The very lettuce they had initially scorned, the abundant, crisp greens from the American heartland, began to represent something entirely different. Not an insult, but an unexpected, almost bewildering bounty. This wasn't merely about taste, it was about survival, a quiet, undeniable testament to a logistical and agricultural power they had been told was faltering. What, then, was the true cost of this culinary education? The true cost of this culinary education wasn't measured in dollars or yen, but in the quiet, agonizing erosion of deeply held beliefs. It began subtly, with the rustle of thin, censored letters from home, carried by new arrivals from the Pacific Front. These weren't triumphant dispatches, but fragmented whispers of hardship. Kenji Tanaka, the former Imperial Army corporal, felt a growing unease. The small, worn wooden bird he kept hidden, a tangible link to his distant home, now felt heavier, almost a burden, as the reality these letters painted contrasted so sharply with his daily existence. He heard the hushed conversations among his fellow prisoners, tales of scarcity, of rice bowls less full, of the gnawing hunger that had become a constant companion for families back in Japan. Captain Eleanor Vance, ever focused on the logistics in her grease-stained ledger, observed a shift in the mess hall. The initial, scornful laughter at the sight of lettuce had softened, replaced by a tentative curiosity, then a quiet acceptance. She noted it in her private logs, a decrease in food waste, a subtle change in the overall health reports from the infirmary. Hiroshi Sato, the Nisei interpreter, found his role subtly changing too. No longer just translating commands, he was now fielding questions about American farming, about how such an abundance of fresh, crisp produce, so vibrant it almost glowed on the metal trays, could be sustained in wartime. The bitter tang of suspicion began to lessen, replaced by a bewildered pragmatism. The revelation wasn't a sudden flash, but a slow, creeping dawn. It was the realization that the bland American diet, once mocked, rich in fresh vegetables and protein, was not merely sustaining life, but offering a quality of existence far removed from the increasingly desperate conditions back home. War Department records, later declassified, would reveal that by late 1944, a staggering 37 unique dietary adjustments had been made across various POW camps, a testament to the efforts to balance cultural expectations with nutritional science. But beyond the numbers, it was the raw, undeniable visual of abundant food that spoke volumes. The very lettuce they had initially scorned, the abundant, readily available produce from nearby Texas farms, became a quiet, undeniable testament to a logistical and agricultural power they had been told was faltering, a power they had critically underestimated. It was a profound recontextualization, a quiet revolution in perception. If this unexpected insight into the true nature of their enemy, revealed through something as simple as a head of lettuce, has made you see this conflict from another angle, please consider leaving a like. This wasn't merely about taste anymore. It was about survival, about a stark, undeniable contrast between two worlds. The practical consequences of this revelation rippled quietly through the camps. Captain Vance, observing the subtle shifts, authorized small garden plots within the Crystal City compound, the dark Texas soil soon yielding familiar vegetables alongside American staples. The scent of tilled earth, once a distant memory, now filled the air as Japanese POWs, once derisive, meticulously cultivated their plots, a quiet act of reclamation and survival. Telegrams dispatched from Crystal City to Fort Hunt, Virginia, began to report a noticeable uptick in POW morale and a decline in health complaints, particularly those linked to malnutrition. Even heavily censored letters home hinted at an unexpected abundance of food. This wasn't merely about sustenance, it was an unspoken bridge. The very vegetable they had scorned, that crisp, green American lettuce, transformed from an insult into a symbol of an undeniable, if perplexing, power and provision. It was a testament to adaptation, a quiet cultural exchange where POWs even taught mess hall staff new ways to prepare these once alien foods. This wasn't about surrender, but about the profound human capacity to find dignity and survival, forging fragile connections across the chasm of war. What seemingly insignificant detail from history has unexpectedly shifted your perspective? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're intrigued by these quiet whispers from World War II, consider subscribing to Whispers from WW2 for more stories that redefine our understanding of the past.